14 centuries ago, a man standing in the deserts of Arabia spoke words that still echo louder today than at any point in history. Not words of comfort, not poetic metaphors, but chilling warnings about a future where the world would feel familiar on the surface, yet dangerously broken underneath. A future where people would wake up, go to work, scroll through distractions, laugh, argue, and sleep, all while standing on the edge of a conflict so vast that once it fully ignites, there would be no untouched corner of the earth. Islam teaches that the most terrifying wars do not begin with explosions or sirens. They begin quietly, when people stop realizing something is wrong. Before we go deeper, tell us where you're watching this from in the comments, and if you want to understand these signs before they fully unfold, subscribe to this channel now so you don't miss what comes next. Islam does not describe the coming war as a single dramatic moment that shocks humanity awake. It describes a slow assembling of conditions, like pieces of a puzzle being placed over generations, while people argue about everything except the truth in front of them. The Prophet Muhammad warned that near the end of time, humanity would live through constant unrest that feels normal, tension that feels permanent, and fear that feels justified. Wars would no longer be rare events. They would become background noise. Conflict would exist everywhere, yet clarity would disappear. People would sense that something massive is coming, but they wouldn't agree on what it is, who caused it, or how to stop it. This is what makes the warning terrifying, not destruction itself, but the fact that people would continue their lives while standing directly inside the early stages of a global confrontation they don't recognize as one. Islam teaches that when signs are ignored long enough, they stop feeling like warnings and start feeling like reality. The Prophet described a time when killing would increase, yet meaning would disappear from it. He said there would be an era where the killer would not truly know why he killed, and the one killed would not truly know why he died. This is not describing madness, it is describing confusion on a massive scale. A world where people fight passionately for causes they barely understand, defend narratives they did not investigate, and hate enemies they were told to hate. Islam warns that this type of war is far more dangerous than traditional battles because it turns ordinary people into participants without their awareness. Weapons are not only metal and fire anymore, they are words, images, fear, and repetition. When truth becomes buried under noise, people stop asking whether something is right and only ask whether it feels justified. Islamic teachings explain that in this period, alliances will constantly shift. Today's enemy becomes tomorrow's partner, and today's partner becomes tomorrow's threat. Treaties will be made, broken, and remade, not for peace, but for advantage. Leaders will speak the language of morality while acting through ambition. The Prophet warned that deception would become so common that people would expect it, accept it, and even defend it. War would no longer be something distant happening over there. It would live inside economies, media, homes, and conversations. This is why Islam teaches that the coming war will feel confusing rather than clear, because when confusion dominates, resistance weakens. What makes this even more unsettling is that Islam teaches people will believe they are more advanced than any generation before them, while being spiritually weaker than many before them. Technology will increase, knowledge will spread, yet wisdom will shrink. Information will be everywhere, but truth will feel rare. In this environment, war does not need to be forced. It naturally emerges. Fear replaces trust, suspicion replaces unity, and anger replaces patience. The Prophet warned that this condition would be so widespread that people would normalize it, saying this is just how the world works now. And that normalization is exactly what allows a global conflict to grow without resistance. Islam's warning is clear but unsettling. The greatest danger is not the moment the war fully erupts, it is the years before it, when people are slowly trained to accept injustice, division, and deception as unavoidable. When confusion becomes permanent, war becomes inevitable. This is why these teachings matter now more than ever, because by the time the final conflict becomes obvious, the opportunity to prevent spiritual collapse has already passed. And according to Islam, the world is far closer to that stage than most people are willing to admit. Islam teaches that before any great external conflict reaches its peak, something far more dangerous happens quietly within societies themselves. The collapse does not begin with bombs or armies. It begins inside homes, hearts, and everyday behavior. The Prophet Muhammad warned that there would come a time when trust would feel rare, honesty would feel expensive, and loyalty would feel temporary. Families would weaken, not always through open hatred, but through neglect, distraction, and constant pressure. Parents would struggle to guide, children would struggle to respect, and generations would feel emotionally distant despite living closer than ever. Islam teaches that when the family collapses, society loses its foundation, and when that foundation weakens, the ground becomes fertile for chaos. The Prophet described a time when leadership would no longer be a responsibility, but a prize. Authority would be given to those who seek it, not those who deserve it. Decisions affecting millions would be made by people driven by ego, greed, or fear rather than justice. Islam warns that when leadership loses integrity, people stop believing in fairness altogether. Laws may still exist, but justice feels absent. When people believe the system is broken beyond repair, resentment grows quietly, and resentment is one of the strongest fuels of war. Another sign described in Islamic teachings is the normalization of betrayal. Promises would be broken easily, trust would be traded for convenience, and people would justify dishonesty as survival. The Prophet warned that truth would feel heavy while lies would feel light and useful. Speaking honestly would come with social and personal costs, while deception would bring comfort and advantage. Over time, this reverses moral instincts. People stop asking whether something is true and start asking whether it benefits them. When morality becomes flexible, unity becomes impossible. Islam also teaches that in this period, patience would be mocked and restraint would be seen as weakness. Anger would be rewarded with attention. Outrage would travel faster than reflection, and division would feel more exciting than understanding. The Prophet warned that people would speak without thinking, judge without knowledge, and condemn without mercy. In such an environment, small disagreements escalate quickly and large conflicts become unavoidable. War does not need to be imposed on a society already burning internally. It simply arrives to finish what division started. Islamic teachings then shift the warning deeper, explaining that the coming conflict is not only social or political, but spiritual. The battlefield moves from land and resources to belief and meaning. The Prophet warned of a time when holding on to faith would feel exhausting, isolating, and even painful. Not because belief disappears, but because the environment becomes hostile to it. Distractions multiply, responsibilities increase, and reminders of death and accountability are pushed aside as uncomfortable topics. People become busy, not fulfilled, entertained, not grounded. Islam teaches that when people forget their purpose, they become easy to control. Fear of loss replaces trust in God, and fear is one of the strongest tools of manipulation. The Prophet warned that people would begin to value safety over truth, comfort over principle, and acceptance over righteousness. Slowly, without realizing it, many would surrender parts of their conscience to feel secure. This is how belief is weakened, not through force, but through gradual compromise. Another sign described is the disappearance of meaningful remembrance. Islam teaches that hearts rust just as metal does, and that rust forms when remembrance of God becomes rare. In this period, spiritual practices are treated as optional, outdated, or extreme. The Prophet warned that people would know many things, but remember very little. Knowledge would increase, but connection would fade. When the soul is neglected, fear fills the space it once occupied. This spiritual erosion directly feeds the coming war. When belief weakens, people seek meaning elsewhere, often in identity, ideology, or conflict. Islam warns that people will attach themselves passionately to causes that give them a sense of purpose, even if those causes are built on falsehood. This is why the Prophet described this era as one of severe trials, not because guidance disappears, but because distractions become overwhelming. The real battle is not to win arguments or dominate enemies, but to remain grounded when everything around you is designed to pull you away from truth. According to Islam, by the time the physical war reaches its peak, the spiritual war has already been won or lost within individuals. The external conflict is only the visible result of an internal collapse that happened long before. This is why these warnings are not about fear, but preparation. Because in an age where the world is loud, divided, and unstable, the most dangerous thing a person can lose is clarity of belief. Islamic teachings warn that as the world weakens internally and spiritually, a new kind of danger rises to the surface, one that does not arrive openly as an enemy, but presents itself as a solution. The Prophet Muhammad warned of a time when deception would reach a level humanity has never experienced before. Not simple lies, but carefully constructed falsehoods wrapped in truth, designed to calm fears, promise stability, and offer relief from chaos. People will be exhausted from constant tension and conflict, and in that exhaustion, they will become vulnerable. Islam teaches that this is when false saviors appear, not necessarily as individuals alone, but as ideas, systems, and narratives that claim to fix everything while slowly stripping people of their moral boundaries. The Prophet warned that during this period, truth would no longer be rejected openly, it would be diluted. Small compromises would be encouraged, framed as necessary and reasonable. People would be told that principles must evolve, that faith must be flexible, and that certainty is dangerous. Islam teaches that this is one of the most effective forms of deception because it does not demand immediate surrender, only gradual adjustment. Over time, people begin to defend ideas they would have once rejected, not because they believe in them deeply, but because they fear standing alone. Another warning tied to this stage is the promise of peace without justice. The Prophet described agreements that appear noble but are built on imbalance and betrayal. Treaties will be signed, hands will be shaken, and speeches will be made about unity and safety. Yet beneath the surface, resentment will grow because peace achieved through deception only delays conflict. It does not prevent it. Islam teaches that false peace is more dangerous than open war because it lulls people into lowering their guard while injustice continues quietly. As deception spreads, fear becomes the main currency of control. People will be warned of constant threats, real or exaggerated, until they begin to accept anything in exchange for security. The Prophet warned that many will abandon moral clarity not because they hate truth, but because they are afraid of loss, fear of instability, fear of isolation, fear of being targeted. Islam teaches that when fear dominates the heart, discernment weakens, and people begin to mistake control for protection. From this atmosphere of deception and fear, the next stage unfolds naturally. Islamic teachings describe how scattered conflicts slowly begin to merge. What once felt like distant problems suddenly feel connected. Regional tensions bleed into global alliances. Economic pressure turns into political hostility, and political hostility turns into open confrontation. The Prophet warned that alliances would form quickly, not based on shared values, but shared enemies. Loyalty would be temporary, shifting as soon as advantage changes. Islam teaches that this is when the world is drawn into a single direction, even though people believe they are making independent choices. One conflict justifies another. One retaliation demands the next. By the time nations realize they are locked into something larger than themselves, the momentum is too strong to stop. The Prophet described this stage as a gathering, not only of armies, but of intentions, grudges, and unresolved injustice. Every ignored wrong, every delayed accountability, returns multiplied. What makes this global conflict unique in Islamic teaching is that it does not feel sudden to those living inside it. Each step feels logical, necessary, even justified. Islam warns that people will say there was no other option, no alternative path. Yet this sense of inevitability is itself part of the trial. The Prophet warned that when the world reaches this point, neutrality becomes difficult, truth becomes costly, and silence becomes tempting. According to Islam, by the time the great confrontation fully reveals itself, the groundwork has been laid for years through deception, fear, and division. The war is no longer only about land or power, it becomes a test of conscience. Who will follow truth when it is unpopular, and who will follow the crowd when it feels safer? This is why these teachings emphasize awareness long before the final clash. Because when the world is finally pulled into one massive conflict, the most important choices will not be made on battlefields, but in hearts that were shaped long before the war began. When Islamic teachings speak about believers during times of overwhelming chaos, the focus shifts away from victory in the worldly sense and toward survival of the heart. The Prophet Muhammad warned that these periods would test people in ways no previous generation experienced, not through constant hunger or open persecution alone, but through pressure, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. Believers would be surrounded by noise, telling them who to hate, what to fear, and what to sacrifice in order to belong. Islam teaches that in such times, strength is not loud and righteousness is not popular. True firmness appears quiet, patient, and often unseen. The Prophet advised restraint when chaos spreads. Not every injustice can be corrected with force, and not every conflict deserves participation. Islam teaches discernment, knowing when to speak and when silence protects the soul. Many will rush to react emotionally, fueled by anger and fear, but believers are warned that uncontrolled reactions often serve the very deception they oppose. Wisdom becomes rare in these times, and that rarity makes it more valuable than strength or numbers. Another critical instruction in Islamic teachings is guarding the tongue and the heart. Words can ignite fires faster than weapons. The Prophet warned that people would destroy relationships, communities, and even lives through careless speech. In an age where information travels instantly, Islam emphasizes responsibility over expression. Believers are reminded that spreading fear, rumors, or unverified claims can make them participants in harm without realizing it. Silence paired with sincerity is often safer than speech driven by emotion. Islam also reminds believers not to mistake isolation for abandonment. Holding on to faith during these times may feel lonely. The Prophet warned that those who remain firm would be seen as strange, extreme, or outdated. Yet Islam teaches that truth has never been measured by majority. Every generation that carried guidance was outnumbered by those who rejected it. This perspective protects believers from desperation, reminding them that difficulty does not mean failure. As the teachings reach their final warnings, the message becomes deeply personal. Islam emphasizes that no global conflict matters more than the individual standing before God. The Prophet warned that when the final trials intensify, excuses will disappear. People will not be judged by what they claim to support, but by what they chose to protect. Faith, honesty, mercy, and restraint will weigh heavier than slogans, affiliations, or emotional loyalty. Islam teaches that the end is not chaos without meaning. It is a conclusion shaped by choices made long before the final moments arrive. Those who spent their lives chasing distraction will face fear unprepared. Those who trained their hearts with remembrance will find stability even when the world shakes. The Prophet reminded his followers that trials do not create faith, they reveal it. The final reminder in Islamic teachings is not about predicting dates or naming enemies. It is about awareness and preparation. The world may descend into confusion, alliances may collapse, and truth may feel distant, but guidance remains accessible to those who seek it sincerely. Islam teaches that no darkness lasts forever and no injustice escapes accountability. The real question is not whether the coming conflict will arrive, but whether hearts will be ready when it does. Because when everything burns away, status, power, narratives, and fear, what remains is what truly mattered. And according to Islam, the greatest victory is not surviving the war of the world, but surviving the test of the soul.